welcome all of you, and thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate you coming today. The earlier research, when I first started in the department, they'd just opened up a lot of land out in the growth areas, so we didn't have population statistics to look at. But we did run some surveys of people who were moving out into those areas, and what we found was that there was a whole lot of young families who were moving from inner suburbs out into the growth areas for the security of owning their own home. And a lot of talk about trade-offs, the things that they were willing to trade off to move further out in Melbourne. And we started to see evidence of stress in these communities. There was data that showed that there was a lack of childcare for people who didn't have access to their family networks anymore because they'd moved away from them locally, much more reliant on public services that weren't there. And then last of all, we started to see the data on long commutes come in. These stresses are playing out in social problems. So in particular, high rates of family violence, very low rates of community participation, and these entrenched gender roles that we are going to, in work that we're going to talk about today.
There's been very little analysis of this lack of employment opportunities and what it means by gender. So how uneven is this access to jobs, how it impacts men and women differently. We've built an interactive website that the team at Whittlesea will share with you, and it brings together analysis not only for Whittlesea but for all local government in Melbourne, comparing inner areas with outer suburban and growth area LGAs. We've based it on ABS data, and we looked at a range of indicators by both location and by gender across employment patterns. So what we found was that while women were more likely than men to have tertiary qualifications, they were less likely to be employed in jobs that reflected that level of qualification. In Whittlesea, it was 48% for women compared to 38% for men, and the gap was greater for the growth areas than in inner areas. Across all the indicators we looked at, it was largely consistent. So men and women in growth areas have a greater disadvantage in access to employment compared to the inner and middle suburbs, but it was much more pronounced for women in growth areas than for men. We know from the data set that gender equity is a spatial issue across the city, and it's impacting on families, communities and productivity. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today about what does this mean for policy and what happens next and the way that we plan for the future in our cities. And I'm committed through our work that we do in public policy to carry this gender lens through in the thinking across all that we do and help to make women much more visible in public policy.
There's nothing that warms the heart of a researcher more than knowing that something they wrote, someone read it, and that it might have made a difference. So I'm really delighted to be here and to be able to personally congratulate Whittlesea Council for the work that they're doing in trying to understand in depth. There is just such an enormous and growing body of research about what makes the difference in a good life is connection. It is the critical thing when we build our suburbs. Connections within household, connections beyond the household in the streetscape. Incidental social interaction is incredibly important as, this stuff saves lives. And of course, deep social connection as well. And in the book, we talk about something called the spatial leash. Women are on a spatial leash because we put children and those we care for first, and that's absolutely appropriate. When we have a dependent person, we do not want that phone call which says you need to come right now and be an hour and a half away on the train. You only have to have that experience once in your life to realise you actually have to live somewhere different. You have to be closer, and that just changes, for many of us, how we choose to live. When we educate women, we draw them into the labour market, we want them to make their contribution, and then we house them out where that is not possible, we create a terrible waste, a waste of their skill and experience. Men, on the other hand, in those circumstances, often find themselves, as we say in the book and found in the research, with an extended and long commute. They step into hyper breadwinner mode. These are gendered work, care, spatial trades, and we can do better. Where I land is better linking up what happens in our labour market with what happens in our homes and in our communities is so important to the gender equality that will be there for not only women in future generations, but women right now, and also taking a lens to it which looks at rich and poor is terribly important because we interviewed people who were very, very well off, who were very isolated, but really the big problems were for younger people in households that were low socioeconomic and lacked services. So we need to get both that socioeconomic and the gender lens working actively. We can certainly do a good job. There's lots to learn from the places that do it well. So thank you and good luck with all that you're doing.
So what we want to do is discuss for an hour one of the 7 topics that are on these tables, and we want you to think about actions that a local government can take. So this is about local government levers. So if you're not in local government, think about the kinds of things that local government can do. It'll still be relevant to you, but we're trying to collate a set of ideas of action that local governments can take. And then I'm going to get you to write your best idea or best 1 or 2 ideas up onto sheets, and we're going to put them up on this wall up here, and then we're going to vote on them. And so I don't need you all to agree, but it is really important. Just remember that if you don't write it down on a piece of paper, we don't know about it. So if you're having ideas, you don't have to all agree with each other, but if you've got an idea, put it down because we're interested in reading it.
Thank you for your energy today. It's been amazing hearing all the energised discussions. We're going to write them up. We're going to circulate them. We've got another report that is more comprehensive than the background paper that's got the whole information. We're going to write that up with the findings from today and circulate that again, where it's all about dissemination and advocacy. So this isn't the end, this is just the start.
This conversation is important and it needs to keep going, but action is going to speak louder than words. And I guess for me, this council is doing some amazing work to really move that forward. So that's definitely my key takeaway.
Yeah, I think it's both in this area but across all the work that we do around public policies, building in a stronger gender lens to really understand what's happening for women in cities and communities and how we can really make that more visible in public policy making.
So we really need to get local jobs for local women. So we need to actually go to some of these government agencies that have got their offices in the city, and we need to start and look at bringing some of these, big corporations, government agencies out to base themselves in some of our growth areas. So, education department or a Vic Roads or a health agency out in Mernda would be fantastic for the thousands of mums that live out there with children.
I suppose today I understood more deeply just how complex and wide the gender disparity is across all the work that we do as local government, as planners, as community planners, as advocates. Really everything that we're working on is deeply impacted by the gender divide, and we need to be more aware of it and take action.
I think it's really exciting to see research evidence being used in a practical way to change our communities. When I look at all the ideas that came from people in the room, which are practical and doable, I'm excited because it's that marriage between really good evidence with practitioners who can make a difference. And this really matters. It matters to the men, the women and the kids who live in this community.